Billy Joe Saunders warns of Canelo's trickery ahead of the Canelo payday, you won payday versus Caleb Plant fight this weekend. We got to talk about all of that in this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Listen, I don't know how you found my video, but somehow, some way you made it. Please help others arrive at the content by hitting a like button. It's free, takes a couple seconds. Let's get it. Now, there's an interview ahead of the fight and Billy Joe Saunders conducted, and I'm going to get into the quotes from Billy Joe Saunders in this exclusive. Billy Joe Saunders, who is the most recent guy to have stepped foot in the ring with Canelo outside of sparring, but in a pro fight. This is what Saunders had to say. Link in the description. I don't think that Canelo, he's this invincible man. I think Caleb Plant has got a very good boxing brain. He just needs to maintain his distance. Make sure you're out of distance. Don't just think you're out of distance because that's the difference when you're in their world level or at an elite level. Caleb Plant, he's got to make sure to be on his game all the way. I think he's going to give Canelo a good fight, right? And this is coming from a guy who has experience in ring with Canelo payday. It says, when asked specifically what Plant is to do to win the fight, Saunders says, quote, I think not to switch off for a single second because sometimes you could feel comfortable in there. Even with it being Canelo, sometimes you can feel very comfortable. I think that's the time where you got to realize you're in there with an elite fighter, not a world-class fighter, and Canelo is an elite fighter. But Plant's got all the tools to cause Canelo problems. He's obviously got to keep it at a long distance. Keep it very busy for the first 6 rounds and then finish strong. He's got to certainly maintain that jab. Being orthodox, I was southpaw and it causes more problems, so he's open to more counters, obviously, than what I would have been, right? So he said his southpaw stance gave different problems to Canelo than an orthodox fighter. And we know this because it's harder to get left-hand in sparring because there's less left-handers in the world in general. Quote, you got to maintain your range at safe distance and box nice, and hopefully the judges score the true boxing scorecards rather than in the name of Canelo. It says, when given his final prediction, though, Saunders favored the Mexican. Quote, I'm going to go with Canelo on points because of the reason of being Canelo. I know how hard it is to get a decision and what tricks, he says, and what tricks they play and might play leading up to the fight. He can't let any of that get to him, completely brush it over his shoulder, and hopefully let his boxing do the talk. So even though Billy Joe Saunders has picked Canelo to win, it sounds like he's giving on, if all things being fair and even, it sounds like he's giving Canelo Alvarez a hell of a fight. He believes that Caleb Plant is going to give Canelo Alvarez, again, all things being fair, a hell of a fight, and he's going to give him maximum problems. He just has to go in there and produce these things, but he has the tools. Now, I know some of y'all didn't want this moment to come. I hate to say it, but the great Ego Stradamus strikes again. A lot of the Canelo Chupapi Muñeño, a lot of the radical Canelo fans, they have gotten triggered from some of my statements in the world of boxing regarding this fight. But you listen to what I say on my videos, which I stand by 10 toes down. Canelo, he's a great fighter. Notice how people give Canelo his props, but they're also realistic. That's called being objective. And there's a lot of Canelo fans that act like more so groupies to a rock star. And they're not really breaking down boxing. They're not breaking down the sweet science. They just have this adoration or this affinity for Canelo, and that's it. You can't say anything else but Canelo's the best. Otherwise, they'll label you as a hater and that kind of thing. And we don't play those games over here on my channel, not Boxing Ego. This is not the channel for you if that's what you're looking for. One-sided diatribes and, you know, me to not be honest with the crowd. But again, the great Ego Stradamus strikes again. You're now hearing another person in the world of boxing, this time a former champion in Billy Joe Saunders who has experience with Canelo Alvarez, and he's saying the same thing I said. Canelo is not invincible. He can be beat. he said you can even get comfortable in there with Canelo, even though it's Canelo. And he didn't slight Canelo. He gave Canelo props, said he's an elite fighter, which is what I said. You also heard guys like Mayweather Promotions CEO Leonard Ellerby say the same thing. Canelo is not unbeatable. I'm picking Caleb Plant. So how come when I haven't even made a fight prediction for the record, but how come when I say this is a challenging fight that I'm looking forward to, and Caleb Plant has the assets and the tools, when I say it, people say I'm a hater and biased and hate Canelo. But Billy Joe Saunders, who shared the ring with him, is mirroring the same comments that I've already told you. I look for this to be an extremely difficult fight. I don't always agree with what Billy Joe Saunders does, his antics, his pranks and stuff like that. But right here, we are on the same page. I think this becomes a hard fight because you have no choice but to factor in the politics. And the politics we've seen in Canelo's past fights is he has these wonky scorecards that are or appear outlandish to that outsider looking in. You look in and you're like, hey, Triple G, I thought he won the fight. How did you give this round to Canelo? Or Edeslandi Lara of Cuba, I thought he won the fight close. How did you have this 117, 110, 111 scorecard for Canelo? Right? You look at the great Floyd Mayweather. Easy work. I ain't got to worry about it. Like I said before, Canelo, he's a young, hungry lion. But at the end of the day, I'll make the best adjustments. Right? When he fought that boy Money Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez clearly lost. You could argue that he lost 12 rounds out of 12 rounds. Right? But one judge, somehow, some way, C.J. Ross, decided that Floyd Mayweather and Canelo Alvarez was a draw. And we know that wasn't a draw. So this is what I'm saying. Amir Khan versus Canelo. The history is deep. So Billy Joe Saunders is cooking. What he's saying is actual facts. I thought Amir Khan easily won the first 4 rounds. Easily. I think Canelo picked it up and started getting to him in round 5. And then round 6 was the destructive knockout. So ultimately, scorecards did not matter, but it's an additional spit in the face when a fighter gets knocked out and then they announce what the scorecards could have been or were going to be, and you see all the rounds scored for Canelo. You've seen this also with Kovalev. I believe 2 of the 3 judges had Canelo winning, and Kovalev looked like he just showed up for a paycheck, and the fight looked FAF. Yet and still, the judges were scoring it. Majority of them were scoring it for Canelo. And I thought Canelo looked pretty poor at the 175, comparatively speaking to his past work at 160, 54, 55, 168. He looked slower. He looked more sluggish. And so Kovalev didn't look great, but he was keeping him at bay with like a lazy jab. And, these are the politics that you got to deal with. And you look at Showtime, they just uprooted Canelo from DAZN and got Canelo, and people are still labeling him the face of boxing and things like that. So, he's an asset to the boxing community, and people are trying, it's a business. People are trying to sell pay-per-views, and they feel like he can do that, and they can build. So you have to wonder if Canelo is in a close fight, if Caleb Plant can even win a close fight, or if he has to do similar to what Floyd Mayweather did and put out a shutout, pitch a shutout. And even when Floyd pitched a shutout, they still try to jerk him. You know what I mean? You can even look at Floyd Mayweather's reaction post-fight. Post-fight, after the Floyd-Canelo fight, he says, "What the F?" They said, "Oh, Judge C.J. Ross has it, blah, 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 blah." And he said, "What the fuck?" Because he was so concerned and like, he knows, as a fighter, if you want to fight at the end, if you feel good, and you feel those vibes, the vibes. If you feel like a winner at the end of the day, or if you feel like you didn't win that fight. And Floyd knows they try to jerk him. And I think Floyd Mayweather, and this is a whole separate video, but Floyd Mayweather, at the end of the day, I think many people try to jerk him. The Maidana gloves, the C.J. Ross scorecard, and he was just too smart. So Floyd, he's the GOAT because so many people wanted him removed from that number 1 spot, number 1 pound for pound, the billionaire, $1 billion raised in boxing. They wanted that blemish on his record, but they just couldn't get it about him. But back to what Billy Joe Saunders said, I have to agree with him. You have to wonder if politics will come into the fold. Now, although I haven't done an actual prediction, I have been on record saying that I think Caleb Plant is going to give major problems to Canelo Alvarez, to the point where certain parts of it may look too easy, because people have conflated and inflated Canelo's actual ability. Like, if we're really, Canelo's a great fighter. But the thing is, if we really look at Canelo when he's fought the best names, when guys had full camps, and when the fight was even remotely on paper a close fight, Canelo hasn't showed crazy separation. Like, tell me Mayweather Gotti, Mayweather versus Diego Corrales type of performance against the better names that Canelo fought, right? And then when you look at those performances, were there any weight stipulations? Were there rehydration clauses, etc.? And this is not taken away from Canelo. He does have skills. He's a skilled fighter. But even look at a young gun like Jaron Boots Ennis. Jaron Boots Ennis went and fought a Thomas Delorme and destroyed him in 1 round. Name a Canelo fight with a Delorme level person from 154 to 175, the divisions Canelo has fought in, where he did that, where he just went it. Even Rocky Fielding, Canelo fought Rocky Fielding and it took 3 rounds or whatever. And this is a guy that most people weren't even familiar with. So it's different stuff we're talking about. So hopefully there's no politics, but it's something you'd be remiss to not speak on it. That's Billy Joe Saunders' thoughts, and I gave you my thoughts based on his interview. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Subscribe if you like the content. And I'm out. Are you tired of your YouTube videos not getting any views? Well, consider TubeBuddy. I've used TubeBuddy for years to scale up my YouTube channel. Now we're sitting over 200,000 subscribers. TubeBuddy is a browser extension that offers a ton of built-in productivity and time-saving services to take your channel to the next level. Use my link in the description to get started with TubeBuddy and level up your channel faster. We working.